South Africa's economy has declined by 3.2% in the first quarter of the year. That's the biggest quarterly contraction in 10 years. Stats SA, which released the latest gross domestic product data today, says the manufacturing industry and the mining and quarry industry were the largest negative contributors to growth in the first quarter. The agriculture, forestry and fishing industry also performed poorly, contracting by 13.2%. The two largest positive contributors to growth came from the food and non-alcoholic beverages sector and housing services. Let's get reaction now. I'm joined by JM Bush's Joseph Busher. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, this has got everybody speaking, ordinary South Africans listening to all the experts speaking about the figures and asking just what does this mean? But the main reaction is one of shock. How did the analysts miss this? They weren't expecting such a big detraction.
No, certainly. I think this is not good for the country. I think we just had our elections. We've got a new cabinet. So the mood should have been very positive in terms of where we want to go as a country. You're aware that, last year the president was on a drive to get 100 billion into the economy in terms of investment. So 3.2 is massive, but more so you're seeing agriculture 13.2, followed by mining, which is some of the major contributors, 10.2, and manufacturing itself down by 8.8. So certainly I think analysts missed it because we thought possibly there has been a little bit of recovery and the positive mood that has been there. But we must not forget that last year we had two technical recessions that came through. So really this is so bad that in the first quarter of the year, just like last year, we negative again, and that's no augur war for the economy.
Now, immediately on the back of this announcement, we saw the rand tanking, which of course will put even more heads in hands, saying what next? How are you expecting the rest of the reaction to this to go on the markets?
So certainly it's going to be negative. You saw that the rand certainly, as you put it now, at 14.7 The market is kind of holding on, but banks and retailers massively hit. True is down about 5%, Standard Bank also down. So those sectors really that has to do with credit certainly are taking a hit because they know that consumers won't be rushing back to the banks and they won't give credit. So you're going to see a little bit of struggle, I think, going into the second quarter. And if the rand remains weak and all prices basically remain where they are, we're going to see inflation ticking up. We got a very good surprise on inflation, but PPI came up higher, which certainly is, because CPI lags PPI. So you're going to see possibly inflation picking up again at the next report.
That's not good news for anybody, really. Now, those industries that were mentioned as contributing factors are industries that are desperate to get more investment trickling into the country. Now, when we were reporting on various economic factors leading up to the elections, we would hear anecdotally from analysts saying that a lot of big companies and potential investors are just holding on to see how the elections play out, what Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet looks like, etc., etc. Do you think that that is now reflective of this, and are we then going to see a turnaround now in that investment trickling into the country?
So from noise perspective, the noise hasn't really settled down. Certainly, I think Mr. Mboweni people wanted him to be there. So there's still a bit of, the old guard, which is overacting in terms of the new guys. So the new guys that have come through. But remember, these new guys are not really the engine of economic growth. So you really need the Minister of Finance, Minister of Enterprises, and Minister of public services. Those are big, I think, kind of ministers people look at. So there wasn't a change from that. But I think apart from our local issues, we have to look at the global market. I think Mr. Trump, China, a U.S. trade war will still continue to detect what happens, and the volatility on the rands really shows that the external factors are as significant as the domestic issues.
Now speaking about those external factors, this is the worst figure to come out since 2009, yes. and that was at the heart or as a result of the global economic crisis. Are you now saying that there's a similar knock-on effect now, but for different global economic reasons?
Certainly, I think it's for different reasons. But I think you need to be able to look historically to say, when, does this happen in terms of when there's a little bit of a downturn from an economic growth perspective, and when do these shocks come in? So the previous financial crisis, we had the currency crisis in 1998, then 2001, 2002, we had the Iraq war, and so on. But, there's a lot of talk talk really that does not instill confidence, from an investor perspective. There's two issues with Iran and the U.S. There's still the back and forth with North Korea and obviously the trade that has been, but also Mr. Trump coming to Moscow to say we're going to add another 5%, and gradually it will be increased to about 15% tariffs on some of the imports because they can't control their borders in terms of people coming into the States. So I think the shocks in the political noise is not going to go down quite soon. So what we need to do domestically is to make sure that we instill confidence. You talked earlier on about the blackouts in Pretoria. And
the capital.
And the contributors really to some of this negative growth in manufacturing and mining was electricity during the first quarter when Eskom was saying, the coal was wet. But the CEO of Eskom also have left. So there's a lot of issues, I think, that does contribute in terms of continuity and to make sure that there's confidence. Eskom is the driver of the economy, is really keeps the lights on. Whether you're talking about industry, schools, you certainly need electricity.
And the many millions of South Africans who are still living without electricity in abject poverty.
We had a dry season this year, so from an agricultural perspective, it was a main contributor last year because the harvest came late, and I think the numbers also were reported late. That's why there was a little bit of recovery. But we are aware that in terms of agriculture, the productions are pretty much lower than it was the previous year. So we need Eskom, in terms of making sure that there is irrigation. If we can't get the natural rains, the farmers need to continue doing their work throughout the season.
The picture I have in my mind is of President Ramaphosa and his now new cabinet in front of a dam wall that's about to burst and running out of fingers to put into the different cracks, but at the same time saying to the rest of the world, but come and invest, everything's fine, there's nothing to see here. And we talk about that confidence, it's fueled very much by sentiment and making all the right noises. But really, the time for the right noises is over, like you said. It's about implementation. We just heard Ace Magashule reporting back from the ANC's Lekgotla saying that there must be a huge focus on implementation. Do you think it's too little too late, or can they turn the ship around?
So we had GEAR, RDP, and lots of policies, I think, that were not really implemented fully. So we've got the NDP now. But we also have Patricia Drill has come through,
Public Works.
In a ministry, Public Works, and that is massive. So we hope that, with this balance in terms of new government, let's be hopeful that I think Ms. Dile will continue to do the good work she has been doing. We also believe President Ramaphosa will make sure that he holds ministers accountable. But whilst the mining and everything was coming down, you saw that government expenditure really grew by 1.2%. So it's actually going in the opposite direction. You're supposed to get executive expenditure coming down and government expenditure coming down. That won't happen. But also unemployment, which means obviously it feeds into the social grants kind of department, and that might still exert pressure on government finances.
Thank you so much. We're going to leave it there for now. Joseph Busher from J.M. Busher's Investment. Thank you so much for that insight. I'm sure it helped many people understand the story we're dealing with today.